Connect MKE Conversations on Race is brought to you by U.S. Bank and the Greater Milwaukee Urban League. Welcome to Connect MKE Conversations on Race. Our ongoing series explores Milwaukee community issues through a racial lens and introduces us to the people working for equity and to make our community better. I'm your host, Denise Calloway. In this episode, we cover a variety of topics, including how the multifaceted approach of a century-old organization is working to make Milwaukee a better place for everyone. We preview a new exhibit that tells the story of how art and artists during the Nazi regime were branded a threat and degenerate. And we focus on law enforcement and public safety with Milwaukee Police Chief Jeffrey Norman and newly elected Milwaukee County Sheriff Denita Ball. But first, we visit with U.S. Bank to learn more about how they're working to end the racial wealth gap through their Building Black Wealth initiative. Stay with us. Welcome back to Connect MKE Conversations on Race. America has a persistent racial wealth gap that is hurting our communities and our economy. According to the Federal Reserve Bank, no real progress has been made in reducing income and wealth disparities between Black and white households over the past 70 years. Institutional and systemic racism and other discriminatory practices have resulted in the net worth of a typical Black family being about 1/10 of a typical white family. U.S. Bank is making significant efforts to close the racial wealth gap. Building Black Wealth is designed to help families access the needed financial resources to build wealth. Joining us to discuss this effort is Scott Ford, President, U.S. Bank Affluent Wealth Management. Let's start with some of the basics. Did I describe the racial wealth gap correctly? And can you talk more about some of the historical factors that got us to where we are today?
You absolutely described it correctly. Your statistics are absolutely spot on. It's been about 70 years since they've been tracking the racial wealth gap between Black households and white households. In fact, the Minneapolis Fed a couple of years ago came out with that precise statement that no meaningful progress had been made in the past 70 years. And we do know that gap has been persistent. And it's just it's a real challenging problem to kind of solve. And that we know that it's about 8-to-1 in terms of the wealth that white families have versus the wealth that Black families have. And much of that is in terms of value of their home as well as the value of financial assets that get transferred from one generation to the next.
One of the things that's important to building wealth is to have a plan where you're going to get started, where you want to go. But some families, some African American families in particular, have an institutional distrust of financial institutions. How is U.S. Bank working to earn that trust so it can begin to work with individuals to build wealth?
Yeah, Denise, great question. One of the insights that we gleaned, or some of the learnings that we walked away with, is, more so than any other ethnic group, African Americans said that they've been mistreated by the financial services industry historically, and so there's an inherent distrust with financial services institutions. They've also said that they want to see themselves represented. So because there's this trust and there's nobody there that looks like me, they believe that, that having more professionals of color, in particular African Americans, would be very helpful. Some of that distrust is born out of things like, for example, redlining, which was the practice of, not lending. And this, many banks and institutions were part of this problem. And, so we want to be part of the solution. But there was a time when banks, as directed by, the federal government, would draw red lines around African American communities and not lend there. And the overall impact of that is the value of the homes in those communities, because you couldn't get financing, was artificially depressed, right? So that is also one of the things that contributes to the distrust of this community. Also things like predatory lending practices where African Americans are charged higher rates than other ethnic groups for the same loans with the same credit scores. So U.S. Bank is really working really hard, to make sure that, number one, we don't engage in any of those practices, and number two, leading in a very deliberate and intentional way to help find solutions to those very challenges.
Building businesses is another way to build wealth and to create a legacy. But Black business owners have historically faced certain barriers to accessing capital and other resources. What are some of the things that Building Black Wealth is doing differently to help Black entrepreneurs and business owners?
Oh, that's actually a really good question, and you're absolutely correct. I mean, part of the reason why the initiative is called Access Commitment is because historically, our folks have not had access, to the resources and the information that they need to, successfully build wealth. And business ownership is certainly one of the ways that, other groups have been able to build wealth historically in this country. And one of the things that we've done is we've partnered with a number of organizations across the United States, in particular some nonprofits and some entrepreneurs, to actually make loans available and to make certain grants available so that they would have access to capital and financing. But one of the more recent developments that I would call your attention to is we created a role of specifically business bankers who are dedicated to African-American communities and African-American business owners, specifically to give them advice and guidance as to how they can successfully run their businesses, and more importantly, how they can access the resources that they need to continue to expand and grow their businesses. So that's something I believe that's unique to U.S. Bank that we're doing. And we have about 9 or 10 of them across the country, and they work in close partnership with our retail bank partners and also with our Access Wealth teams, which are comprised folks who are from, financial advisors and private bankers across the United States, to make sure they have access to world-class advice so they can successfully build their companies.
Retirement planning and estate planning are also key. How does the right kind of retirement planning help secure and build wealth?
Well, retirement planning is really important. And here's what many people don't realize, Denise. You could be retired as long or longer than you were working. So, my mom, who's now 81 years old, retired when she was 55. She taught school for 28 years. She's been retired for longer than that, right? So retirement planning is really important because it's really all about how are you going to make sure that the money that you have will last. So, making sure that you have done some planning so that you can have some idea about, how to invest your money today so it grows over time in the future. One of the mistakes that we see in particular with African Americans is we don't take enough risk, right? And we don't take advantage of our company retirement plans like 401ks and 403bs. And when we do take advantage, we don't contribute enough in those plans, right, over time out of our salaries, so that we'll have enough money when we do get to that retirement age. So I would tell you, the first thing you need to do is make sure that you engage in some kind of financial planning exercise. Certainly, you be more than welcome to contact some of our folks in our branches at U.S. Bank Wealth Management. It's a complimentary service, and they're more than willing to help you sit down and figure out where you are. But that's a really, really important aspect of making sure that you will have enough money in retirement to retire with dignity.
And estate planning is important if you're trying to move wealth from one generation to the next.
That's exactly right. It's the estate planning with some of the recent tax changes, and this is not meant to be tax advice, but at $12 million, any assets that you have above $12 million will be subject to federal estate taxes. And those federal estate taxes range anywhere from 18% to 40%, which is significant. And many states also have a estate tax. It's also sometimes referred to as a death tax. And so think about this. Perhaps you own, a family farm, right? And that land could be valued at, well above $12 million, but just because of the acreage, or you own some real estate. So it's really not that hard as much as it might seem. It's not that hard to be above that asset level. And that could potentially decimate a family's income, but the assets, because you would have to sell off those assets to pay that federal estate tax, because most people are not going to have the cash sitting around. But estate planning is really about how you plan for those estate taxes and how you can, do things like buy insurance policies, which could be a funding vehicle to pay the estate tax, or there are things you could do in terms of the structure of your estate to make sure that you keep it under those levels. So that kind of goes hand in hand with financial planning, but it generally speaking, it's for people that have accumulated more assets over time. But again, really important to do it.
What is one thing people can do today to get started to building wealth?
Oh, one of the most important things I would suggest is, number one, I'm a firm believer you got to have a financial plan. Think about, if you were going to drive across country, you would not just leave your house and try to wing it. You would have some idea about how you're going to get there, and that's really what financial planning is all about. But one of the essential things I would suggest that people do is, have a savings plan, right? 47% of all Americans could not come up with $400 in the event of an emergency. So what happens if, your boiler breaks or the hot water heater breaks? Now you've got to go and put that on high interest credit card that you might not have the money to pay off. And so you're paying for that thing over a long period of time. So I would say, get in a financial plan, make sure you have an emergency fund, and save and invest systematically over time, and you will be surprised how you could build wealth. Those are some very simple things that you could do to build wealth over time.
Great advice, Scott Ford of U.S. Bank and Building Black Wealth. Thank you so much for joining us and for the work that you are doing to make our families and our communities stronger.
Thanks, Denise. It was great to chat with you.
When we return, we'll learn about a century-old organization that has empowered communities and changed lives for African Americans living in the Greater Milwaukee area. My conversation with Greater Milwaukee Urban League President and CEO, Dr. Eve Hall, is next. Welcome back. Since 1919, Greater Milwaukee Urban League has empowered communities and changed lives. Assisting the community with education, employment, training, and advocacy, GMUL brings hope to communities that need it the most. Joining us to talk more about the work of Greater Milwaukee Urban League is Dr. Eve Hall, President and CEO. Dr. Hall, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
For anyone who is not familiar with the work of the Urban League, what does it do, and how is it different from other civil rights organizations?
So I would say what is special about the Urban League, both the Greater Milwaukee Urban League and actually the National Urban League, of which we were founded. We were founded, Denise, to be an advocate, to be a voice for the millions of African American individuals and families that were moving from the South to the North, to the East, to the West for a better way of life. And we focused on housing, health, education, employment, entrepreneurship. We facilitated civic engagement, social justice issues, and everything was about the betterment and stabilization of African American families. We're very unique in that that's how we were founded, as this social service and urban advocacy organization.
What is some of the work that Greater Milwaukee Urban League does locally in the areas of education and employment? What are some of the different programs that are offered?
So in terms of education, we actually partner with 9 schools, providing mentoring, providing community experiences, connect to leaders in the community, both from business as well as from nonprofits. We engage them in even some of our national activities. For instance, we had a couple of students who attended a national youth conference during the summer. We provide laptops to high school seniors. They have to apply by writing, the reason why, in fact, we should award them. But we also recognize them for their community service. And most recently, we provided scholarships. In terms of employment, we are supporting individuals who are returning citizens, just trying to get back on their feet, to individuals who may be interested in changing their job or career interest. We provide stipends in terms of support for transportation, because many of our jobs that we may connect to may be off the bus line. So we want to ensure through our last mile program that individuals can get to their work spaces.
So it's really programs that are designed to meet needs in the community that in some cases just may not be met anywhere else.
That's true. And in fact, one of our other programs that I failed to mention is driver's education. You and I both know that at one point in time, our public schools provided driver's education. That is no longer the case. So we are one of several locations that provides the driver's permit for individuals at very minimal cost. We're looking to expand it, if at all possible, to 16 through 18-year-olds. So that is another very important program that actually empowers and enables our individuals to be independent and, again, to get to jobs or other resources that they need to get to.
One of the things that you've recently started working on a bit more is advocacy work. Why did you decide that advocacy was something that you needed to, especially pull out and focus on and pay attention?
Advocacy has been central to the Urban League. As an organization, that is what we are always doing, Denise. However, I wanted us to be very specific in some areas of concern: health, housing, voter education. Those are three areas that are naturally a part of the Urban League, but areas in which we don't necessarily have a structured program, but we need to be a voice for equity and equality. So in health, we promoted the vaccination. Housing, we know that Milwaukee, unfortunately, is part of a group of cities in which our ownership rates are very low for African Americans. So we actually are involved in a project that consists of 30 scattered site houses. And we are presently preparing 7 individuals or 7 families to be able to actually purchase one of these homes. Lastly, voter education. We've been part of a national movement in making sure that our community is educated about those who are running for office, understanding their rights in terms of voting, and making sure that they have options as well as access to vote.
Last month, you kicked off a really exciting program in coordination with Molson Coors and other community organizations. It's called the Entrepreneurship Connection. Tell us about that program, what it is, and what it's designed to do.
So you are right. We are very excited about this. This project is in partnership with Molson Coors. Molson Coors, formerly Miller, has been a partner of the Urban League for over 30 years. And the purpose of this partnership is to support entrepreneurs. It is in collaboration with other organizations who actually provide day-to-day technical assistance to entrepreneurs, but we are serving as a convener, bringing together individuals with expertise on how our businesses can secure capital. We know that capital continues to be an issue for many of our businesses. So we believed that in order for us to stand strong around economic vibrancy, equity, and equality, in making sure that people have a way to build wealth, that our work and entrepreneurship definitely was needed. But what we're doing, Denise, is again, we're serving as a convener. We launched our initiative with a session at the Pfister Hotel. We had anywhere from 80 to 100 attendees. We had a dynamic panel who presented on entrepreneurship, how you need to be prepared, speaking about capital. And what we heard from our attendees is that they felt this was a safe space. They really respected and appreciated the candor of individuals who were either entrepreneurs or providing funding support for businesses. Molson Coors is committed to supporting our underserved communities. And one of the highlights of this partnership is Molson Coors is sponsoring 150 slots for an online platform called The Lonely Entrepreneur. And this is at least a $250 to $300 yearly subscription for entrepreneurs who are committed to have access to this online information. And to some, 250, 300 may not seem a lot, but as you're trying to build your business, sustain your business, every dollar makes a difference.
And I'm sure as we have people listening to us now, people are going to want to know how they can learn more about becoming part of the Lonely Entrepreneur Program.
So they can simply call us 414-374-5850 to find out when our next session will be. It will be sometime this month, Denise. We have not confirmed the date and the location. They may also go to our website, www.tmul.org, to learn more about the Urban League and, connect to this new initiative as well. And we truly welcome the community. Just listening to the questions, watching the networking, just seeing the commitment that these entrepreneurship leaders had in supporting others in our community was amazing and refreshing.
Thank you very much for coming on and talking to us about what Greater Milwaukee Urban League is doing, and especially the new Entrepreneurship Connection, Dr. Hall. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
When we return, we'll preview a new art exhibit at Jewish Museum Milwaukee that sheds further light on how culture and politics intertwine and how art reflects reality. Stay with us. Welcome back. During the Nazis' rise to power, works of art across Europe were confiscated in the thousands. It was an attack to change Germany's cultural landscape, a key step in Hitler's plans for his so-called racial cleansing. From now until June 4th, Jewish Museum Milwaukee is featuring recovered art from private and institutional collections. The new exhibit explores the Third Reich's use of modern art as a tool of propaganda for public indoctrination to Nazi ideology, and some of the artists, movements, and events and outcomes of being branded degenerate.
Why degenerate? That's really interesting. It's really a term that he co-opted, or that the National Socialists co-opted. The term had been really in the vernacular since, even before the late 1800s, but a gentleman by the name of Max Nordau, who is, ironically enough, a Jew and an ardent Zionist. He's also a physician, and he writes a book called Entartung, Degeneracy. And in this book, he comes up with this thesis about modern art, and basically saying it's the work of people so feeble-minded, and it's a term that was largely associated with mental illness, criminality. That term degeneracy was taken and applied to, first to the artwork, then to the people who created it and supported it, and then that dial slowly turned to anybody and anything that was not viewed as pure Aryan, German, dedicated, anything that could possibly be seen as a foreign or dangerous element, and therefore it was reasonable that it should be banned and ultimately eliminated from society. It's interesting when you talk about Hitler and a war on modern art. I think there were several things going on here. Hitler was an angry, failed artist. He, from a young age, saw himself as an artist, but he applied and was rejected twice from the Vienna Fine Arts Academy. And when Germany agreed to sign the Treaty of Versailles and take responsibility, he was furious. He scapegoated foreign elements, which he largely labeled again Bolshevik, Jewish, unfounded, but that's where he's laying the blame. And so I think there's a layering of things going on. It is all about aligning the German people behind the idea of the strength of a master race and the needing to get rid of any foreign detrimental elements and whatever the cost may be to get there. It's unique for a number of reasons. This is a topic that certainly has been explored over a number of decades through different institutions, but this particular body of work is completely unique. It's never been brought together before, and it will likely never be brought together again. So again, the idea of being able to explore this narrative, but particularly through local collections. I mean, to have that opportunity to, again, tap into what is in archives, what might normally not have a public audience, or there might not even be knowledge that these collections exist within our state. So it was an incredible opportunity to come at this subject through this unique grouping of works. People are going to come in and they're going to learn about this really important chapter in history, more about how culture and politics are completely intertwined. We talk about, art holding up a mirror to society and reflecting the realities, the social and political ails. So being able to learn about that narrative, some of these incredible artists, how they responded. Some of the artists who were labeled degenerate were some of the most celebrated in the 20th century. And also to, again, experience this from Wisconsin collection-based perspective, which is, I think, really the great opportunity in so many ways. Many people will walk into this exhibit and through contemporary eyes will kind of be puzzled by why some of these pieces or modern movements were labeled degenerate. There are portraits in here or themes or techniques that to the contemporary eye really seem very acceptable and not dangerous. So then once you start getting into, the fact that this was a watercolor and there are areas of this that are more intensely shaded, areas that are not filled in. There are sketch areas that are left unfinished. There are facial features that are not precise. So the technique, the idea that someone may be depicted as showing emotion. There's a portrait behind you, it's of a woman, and people will look at this and think, this doesn't seem particularly dangerous or offensive. What is it about it? Well, it's a woman. She's not a canon of artistic beauty. She looks downtrodden. And that's not the strength and heroism that Hitler and the National Socialists wanted to portray. And that resulted in people, particularly German artists, being labeled enemies of their own state. People who are war veterans, many had fought in World War I. And instead of embracing them and thanking them for their service, they were told that what they were doing was not pure German art, Aryan art. And therefore, they and their artwork were decay, and they needed to be rid of. The lessons that we can learn historically, before the, attack on modern art, there was an attack on writing and literature, and there were mass book burnings. Now we are at a point in society where we have people who are looking to eliminate components of history that largely target disenfranchised people and voices, and being asked to, kind of whitewash history in many ways. And that is a disservice to everyone.
For the first time in Milwaukee's history, Milwaukee's county executive, mayor, sheriff, and police chief are all people of color. For our final two conversations this evening, I sit down with Milwaukee's two law enforcement leaders, beginning with the newly elected Milwaukee County Sheriff, Dr. Denita Ball. Welcome back. The job of protecting Milwaukee County's residents and keeping them safe is no small task. Dr. Denita Ball is the first woman elected Milwaukee County Sheriff just last November. She'll be calling on her 30 years of law enforcement experience as she tackles the challenges facing the department and our community. Sheriff Denita Ball joins us now. Welcome to Connect MKE, Sheriff Ball, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
With 3 decades of law enforcement experience in Milwaukee, including 3 years as Chief Deputy Sheriff, you know the challenges that exist. The Sheriff's Department is responsible for providing public safety in a number of different places, including the courthouse, the county grounds, parks, freeways, the Milwaukee County Jail, and also Mitchell International Airport. It is a lot of ground to cover, and staffing in some of those areas has been an issue. What is staffing like now?
Staffing is getting better. I think our partnership with the county's human resources area has helped us to increase our staffing, whether it's in the jail and now as far as the deputy sheriff ranks. We currently have a class going for each. And so we're seeing some progress, but we still have people who are retiring. And we are taking some of the correctional officers and putting them into the deputy class. So I think we're shooting ourselves in the foot in that respect, but we've been making inroads and there's a lot of progress on that front.
From January 2020 to just last December, there have been 6 deaths in the jail. 4 of those deaths were suicide. What's being done to keep individuals safe, even from themselves sometimes, when they're in the Milwaukee County Jail?
Yes, our staffing has really impacted the jail, and we've had to have deputies in those roles to make sure that everyone is safe. But I just want to remind people that yes, unfortunately, we have had some suicides, some deaths in custody. Our goal is not to have any deaths while someone is in our care and in our custody. You don't see how many times daily we are putting steps in place or doing things to prevent suicides. You do hear about those unfortunate ones, but on a daily basis, several times a day, our people are intervening because if someone is really hell-bent on taking their life, eventually they will find a way. And so I think we are doing a good job of trying to make sure that those in our care and in our custody are safe. We are looking at our processes. We always do that after a death in custody to make sure if there's something that we can do better. And maybe there's something that we have in place that wasn't enforced, but we're always looking at that.
It's one of the issues that you face when folks come into the jail is one that we're facing in the community right now as well, and that is just the extreme level and stress that people feel that they're under and the mental health issues that people feel that just may be exasperated when they're in a situation where their stress is just heightened.
That could be a factor. As you know, usually the jails are really a mental health ward on steroids. And so a lot of people who need help, they cannot get that help. And so they end up being incarcerated instead of being in a facility where they can get the help that they need. And I think if we do address some of those issues, including mental health or some of the other issues which may have caused a person to commit a crime, if we can work together to address those issues, then maybe once, they serve their time, that they will have hope, and even, behind bars, and we have some programs that can help facilitate a job placement or improving their education and things like that. When they get out, they will be more equipped to have the jobs that they may need, that may have caused them to commit a crime because they didn't have the funds or wasn't able to provide housing. So I think we have to look at a person, look at everything that's going on with a person if we really want to make sure that they're not a revolving door within the criminal justice system.
What are some of those education efforts that you have found to be helpful?
Well, we definitely are using social media more to let the community know what the dangers of distracted or reckless driving, or give tips regarding winter driving, and just talk about where we are as far as our reckless driving enforcement. We're going to be in these troubled areas. And so it's alerting the public that these areas are, they're problematic. We are increasing our enforcement, and we have seen a decrease in crashes in most of those areas as our enforcement level has gone up.
How much are your deputies doing to enforce that kind of work now compared to what was being done, let's say, 3 years ago when you were the chief deputy sheriff?
I think the level of driving has gotten worse over time. And so the focus has increased. And as a result, we have had to step up our enforcement efforts. So we do have a reckless driving initiative. I just had a meeting with the other municipalities to talk about what we are doing within our respective areas of responsibilities, because as you know, a car has no boundaries. And so I wanted to see how we can leverage what we're doing and what they're doing to have a greater impact. And so we have increased our enforcement regarding reckless driving because it has increased over the years.
What is one goal that you have for the department that when you meet it will have the greatest impact on the community, Sheriff Ball?
Our community engagement. I believe it's important that we improve police-community relations. I think that when we are working together, we can accomplish much. And so oftentimes, because of things that have occurred in some other area of the community, it has a direct effect on us, unfortunately. And so we have to always continue to, improve those relationships. And we do that by one interaction at a time. But I think if we can do that, it'll have a direct effect on our enforcement efforts. Maybe we won't have to do as much enforcement because of the community work that we have put in.
Thank you so much for being with us, Sheriff Denita Ball. We wish you nothing but success and safe shifts for all of your officers. When we return, we'll pay a visit with Milwaukee Police Chief Jeffrey Norman and hear how the MPD is dealing with violent crime, gun violence, reckless driving, and staff shortages, all while increasing the public's trust. Stay with us. Welcome back. Since 2020, Milwaukee has experienced a spike in some violent crimes. It's something that not only concerns citizens, but the Milwaukee Police Department as well. In our final conversation of the evening, I sit down with City of Milwaukee Police Chief Jeffrey Norman to learn more about how the MPD is dealing with violence and reckless driving, all while coping with staff shortages. Joining us now is the Chief of the Milwaukee Police Department, Jeffrey Norman. Chief Norman, thanks so much for being with us, and thanks so much for having us here with you.
Thank you.
How would you describe your biggest challenges that the department is facing?
Well, I've always said the biggest challenge for the department is trust. Understanding that building trust with our community, with our partners, our elected officials, that we will always have the best interests of our community in mind, and that our department only works as well as the community allows us. And trust helps provide information in regards to incidents of crime, engagement, understand that we are responsive toward the community. And the only way that you can really have a truly impactful relationship is to have a trusting relationship. So Milwaukee Police Department is committed to continue to work on trust, being out there engaged, being in corners where we're not expected, continue to be in corners that we are expected, to ensure that we're always creating, nurturing, and respecting the trust that's given to us.
So one thing I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about are some of those other challenges that do exist. And one of them really is the homicide rate. When we take a look at 2022, it was the third year in a row that there was a record number of homicides, with the north side and the northwest side hit the hardest. What are some of the factors that you know are causing that increase?
Seeing the dynamics of what drives this homicide rate in our city, we know that a large part is unfortunately unknown. But what we do know is that domestic violence and the inability to resolve your conflict, meaning conflict argument, is the two main factors in our homicide rate. In fact, it almost contributes to half of the homicides that took place in our city. So with that understanding, gives you a base to go and say, how do we impact, how do we intervene? And it's important to understand that it's not just the Milwaukee Police Department's responsibility alone. Work with partners, work with different institutions within our community to truly make not only a direct impact, but a sustainable and consistent impact.
Are weapons too accessible? Is this, if we reached a point when we look at the number of homicides that are committed using firearms, the number of people who are injured, and other acts of violence using firearms, have we reached a point where the city, the police department, need to ask the legislature for some kind of relief and help to address the issue of the proliferation of weapons in our city?
So whenever it comes to addressing a multifaceted, complicated issue, I'm looking for all solutions, beyond just the legislator, but our community, to our elected officials, to our community stakeholders. We all have a responsibility to deal with at the heart of this issue. It's behaviors. There's a lot of different tools out there that can create harm, but if you have the wrong behaviors attached, whether it's negligent in regards to making sure you put up that firearm in a responsive manner, or you're talking about in regards to how do you resolve a conflict or argument in a productive way. And so whatever that can help deal with behaviors, making sure that we are, again, putting out the right type of support for the mental health issues or the issues in regards to, again, understanding the gravity of the responsibility of owning a firearm, we'll be making some true impact.
Reckless driving continues to be a big issue in the streets of Milwaukee. There are some initiatives that have been put in place, including confiscating vehicles. Are those working quickly enough, and are there other steps that the department can take to help get this under control?
I would say that we're moving in a positive direction. Seeing that, when we have enacted the towing policy, which was back in May of 2022, accomplishing over 218 tows. Now, that can be a glass half empty, a glass half full. We'd like to see is a glass half full. For those individuals who have been told, we have not seen a repeat in that behavior for those individuals who have been in that infraction, but also no repeat behaviors when we have sued individuals who were called the most egregious violators. Twice we had a pretty almost an unorthodox, but a new initiative where we have put forth the power of the nuisance law and sued reckless drivers and made sure that there is accountability from the court system.
I do want to talk about the department's personnel study that was done. was released just a few weeks ago. 211 pages, that's a lot of information to look at.
Absolutely.
But I'm sure there's one point that did not surprise you, and that is the department is short-staffed. What are some of the recommendations to address that issue? There's the obvious, hire more officers, but folks have to go through the training and the class, so there's some other things that can be done to get more sworn officers on the street.
Right. And definitely welcome the matrix study, understanding that is something that was put forth, a couple years ago in regards to having a deep dive look into our department. Some of the recommendations, reallocation of personnel. We do that all the time, depending on cost of service, needs of the respective districts. Also going through a civilianization process. How do you civilianize to take situations where you are having a sworn officer actually do a non-sworn duty? And so that's a process, not a quick process. You got to deal with, contract negotiations, rules and laws. So it's a steady process, but we understand that there's opportunity in that. Also that we look at from the standpoint of how do we take some of the burden off the officers in responding to calls so to free them up for more serious. So we got the online reporting where you're able to call in certain reports so you don't have to have an officer respond. Utilizing some of our non-sworn, our community service officers, what we call CSOs. Those help in regards to dealing with lower level incidents. Maybe you have a theft report or, a simple accident where you can have those individuals help out for those duties and keeping your sworn officers available.
Officers see so much firsthand. I've heard people describe it as it's a job where you see people every day on what may be the worst day of their life. What kind of supports are there in place to help officers with what they see every day?
You're absolutely right. It is a challenge. One, we need to be intentional as leaders to give them a little balance. Being able to be part of engagements that remind them why they got into this profession. Remind them in regards to that no officer came on the particular career with a, who cares about the world. They have a light inside of them. So we need to continue to nurture that where that engagement aspect helps remind you that, there's a lot of good out there in our community and that you need to be a part of it and see that. There's intentionality on our part as a department. We know we need to have officers healthy in body and also in mind. And so working on that and also not being afraid to ask for help. As you talked about, one of our recent members, unfortunately, was killed in the line of duty. So we asked for outside help. There is a group called LEADER, law enforcement death response team. All across the state came in and did a number of debriefings for all our 2,200 members. Because it's more than just the sworn officers who are affected by this. We have people working our communication division. They're the 911 operators. They have to hear these particular traumatic situations. We have individuals supporting officers from the non-sworn side. And so we need to be, again, addressing all of those pain, trauma, and concerns as a one team.
We've appreciated the time that you've given us to talk about both the challenges and successes that the Milwaukee Police Department is having, but you can't be everywhere. Tell me what you need citizens to do.
I think that at the end of the day, do what speaks to you. That being a bystander is unacceptable. There is something that you can find some type of, drawn to, committed to, whether it's helping with a local church with, the Sunday school with the kids or, going to a, community group or, being a part of some of the efforts in regards to putting out the word about reckless driving. I always say to the community, just do something.
Chief Norman, thank you so much for being with us. We really do appreciate it. Thank you for joining us for Connect MKE Conversations on Race. To rewatch and share these important stories, visit our YouTube page at youtube.com/connectmke. And as always, join us weekly for our discussions with local leaders and community members on Connect MKE each Saturday morning on My 24 and Sunday mornings on CW18. I'm your host, Denise Calloway. Thank you for joining me tonight for Connect MKE Conversations on Race. A special thanks to our sponsors, U.S. Bank and the Greater Milwaukee Urban League.